Welcome to the Trend Reddit channel. This is where we share interesting, funny, and emotional stories about family life. Under the sparkling lights of a luxurious restaurant, an unexpected tragedy occurred. The wife of a millionaire suddenly collapsed, and no doctor could save her. What led to this tragedy? Let's laugh, reflect, and sometimes shed tears together with these meaningful stories. If you love relatable and touching tales, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our videos. Be sure to click the notification bell to get the latest updates on our new episodes. Thank you for your support and for being with Trend Reddit. The Crescent View restaurant stood proudly at the heart of New York City, renowned for its elegance and exclusivity. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline, creating a serene, almost dreamlike atmosphere. On any given night, it was a haven for the city's elite, a place where business deals were sealed with handshakes, and personal milestones were celebrated with luxurious champagne. Tonight, the air was thick with a sense of occasion, but also with something far less tangible, a quiet tension that seemed to ripple through the walls. In a private corner of the restaurant, Evelyn Monroe sat across from her husband, Richard Monroe. The evening marked their 15th wedding anniversary, a milestone worthy of celebration. The table was set impeccably, polished silverware, crystal glasses filled with the finest wine, and a floral arrangement that matched the opulence of the venue. Everything was perfect. Yet, as Evelyn glanced around the room, a subtle feeling of unease began to creep up her spine. Evelyn Monroe had always been a woman of grace, admired not just for her beauty but for her philanthropy and her keen intellect. Her life appeared ideal from the outside: lavish vacations, charity galas, and the kind of wealth that brought with it a certain freedom. But beneath the surface, there was more. Tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her husband's calm, controlled demeanor, usually a source of stability, felt unsettling. She could sense it, the coldness behind his composed smile, the way his eyes seemed to study her rather than enjoy the evening. Richard Monroe was a man who thrived on control. His entire career had been built on making calculated decisions, each one methodically designed to bring him power, success, and, most importantly, wealth. He was a successful businessman, managing a portfolio of ventures that ranged from real estate to high-end investments. To the world, he was the picture of success, a man who had everything, including the love of his beautiful wife. But behind closed doors, Richard was a different man, one whose motivations often blurred the line between ambition and something darker. Tonight, he appeared to be the loving husband, celebrating years of marriage, but even in his most charming moments, something seemed off. As the waiter arrived with their appetizers, Evelyn's unease deepened. A plate of shrimp sat delicately before her, beautifully arranged, yet the sight of it made her stomach churn. She hadn't eaten shrimp in years, knowing her body's sensitivity to certain foods. It was strange that Richard had ordered it for her, given how well he knew her preferences. But when she questioned it, he simply smiled, his voice as smooth as ever. "Trust me, my love, you'll enjoy this," Richard said, raising his glass for a toast. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then lifted her own glass to meet his. The crystal clinked softly between them, echoing in the quiet space they occupied. "To 15 wonderful years," he said, watching her intently. His gaze was unwavering, almost expectant. "To 15 years," Evelyn echoed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took a small bite of the shrimp, her instincts warning her that something wasn't right. The evening unfolded in a way that felt scripted, as though they were actors in a play, reciting lines that no longer carried any meaning. Richard was charming, attentive even, but it all felt like a facade, an act he was performing for the benefit of others watching, rather than for her. As the night wore on, Evelyn began to feel a strange sensation in her stomach. At first, she dismissed it as nerves, perhaps the result of the tension she had been feeling all evening. But the discomfort grew, a knot tightening in her abdomen, followed by a wave of nausea that left her lightheaded. Her vision blurred slightly, and she reached for her water, hoping to steady herself. "Are you all right?" Richard asked, his voice laced with concern. Yet, beneath the surface, Evelyn could detect something else, something far colder. I think I need to step outside for some air, Evelyn murmured, her voice strained. Before she could rise from her seat, a sharp pain shot through her chest, and her breathing became labored. She gripped the edge of the table, panic rising within her as the room began to spin. The waitstaff, sensing something was wrong, rushed over, offering assistance. But the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Evelyn's vision darkened as she began to lose consciousness, her mind reeling. Was it the shrimp? Had she simply eaten something that didn't agree with her? Or was it something more? Across the table, Richard remained composed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched his wife's condition deteriorate. He reached for his phone, calling for an ambulance with a calm efficiency that betrayed little emotion. To the onlookers, he was the concerned husband, doing everything he could to save his wife. But those closest to him might have noticed the subtle flicker of something else, relief, perhaps, or even satisfaction. Within minutes, the restaurant staff had cleared the area, and medical personnel were on their way. Evelyn was barely conscious, her world reduced to the sound of her labored breathing and the faint hum of voices around her. Her body felt heavy, like she was sinking into a void, unable to fight against the pull of unconsciousness. Richard stood beside her, holding her hand as the paramedics arrived, his expression one of practiced worry. But in his mind, he was already thinking ahead, planning for what would come next. As Evelyn's world went dark, the final thought that crossed her mind was a question: why did this feel like more than just an accident? The ambulance's siren blared as it rushed through the busy streets of New York, carrying Evelyn toward the hospital. What had started as a celebration had quickly turned into a life-or-death situation, and the tension in the air now felt palpable. Richard rode silently beside her, his mind calculating the next move, while Evelyn's life hung in the balance. Evelyn Monroe's evening of celebration turned into a nightmare almost as swiftly as it had begun. She had taken a few bites of the shrimp Richard had so thoughtfully ordered for her, trying to push away the strange sense of dread that had been building since they sat down. But now, that dread had materialized into something very real and dangerous. At first, it was only a slight discomfort. A twinge in her stomach, a feeling she tried to shake off. Perhaps she had eaten too fast, or maybe it was the wine mixing poorly with her food. She sipped her water, hoping it would pass, but within moments, the pain intensified. A knot tightened in her stomach, spreading quickly to her chest. Her breath hitched, and she instinctively reached for her throat, as if by doing so she could stop the panic that was starting to bubble within her. Her vision blurred. A cold sweat broke out on her skin, and the light around her seemed to flicker, as if the entire world had begun to spin uncontrollably. The sound of voices in the restaurant became distant, muffled as though she were underwater. She blinked, trying to clear her head, but the fog only thickened. Richard noticed her distress. His hand reached out to touch her arm, the gesture deliberate but somehow lacking warmth. "Evelyn," he asked, his voice calm yet measured. "Are you all right?" Evelyn couldn't answer. The pain in her chest had grown sharper, her breathing more labored. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of panic grip her, a fear that this wasn't just a simple case of food poisoning. Her body was betraying her, shutting down, and she had no control over it. "I think something's wrong," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Richard remained composed, though his eyes flickered with something unreadable. He reached for his phone, dialing the number for emergency services with a practiced ease that didn't match the urgency of the situation. His voice remained steady as he spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the situation. "My wife is unwell. We're at Crescent View. It could be serious. Send help immediately." By now, the restaurant staff had noticed something was wrong. A waiter approached, his face etched with concern. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes scanning Evelyn's paling face. She couldn't respond. Her body was growing weaker, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. The waiter acted quickly, signaling to his colleagues. "We need help here," he called out to the kitchen staff. Another waiter rushed over with a first aid kit, while the restaurant manager frantically tried to find a doctor among the diners. Evelyn's head swam with confusion. She tried to focus on Richard, on his face, searching for comfort, but there was none to be found. His expression remained controlled, almost distant. She didn't understand why he wasn't more frantic, why his calm demeanor felt so misplaced given the gravity of the situation. Her breath became more ragged, and a wave of dizziness overtook her. She gripped the edge of the table, but it offered no support. The world around her continued to blur, her senses dulling as if she were being pulled into unconsciousness. Fear coursed through her as she realized that she was slipping away. "Hold on, Evelyn," Richard murmured, his hand still resting on her arm, but his tone remained cool. "Help is on the way." She wanted to scream that it wasn't fast enough, that she needed help now, but her voice failed her. She could only stare at him, her mind a jumble of fear and confusion. The man she had spent 15 years of her life with, the man she thought she knew, seemed so foreign to her in that moment. The waiter returned, this time with a glass of water and a cold towel, trying to bring her some relief. "Here, ma'am, try to drink this," he urged, but Evelyn couldn't lift her hand to take the glass. Her limbs felt like lead, weighed down by whatever was coursing through her system. The waiter glanced at Richard, clearly expecting him to show more alarm, to do something more than just sit there. But Richard didn't move. His face remained an unreadable mask, betraying no emotion other than mild concern. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours to Evelyn. The paramedics were en route, but she wasn't sure if she could hold on long enough. Her vision dimmed further, the lights of the restaurant growing distant, like stars fading in the night sky. Her breath came in shallow gasps now, each one a struggle, each one harder than the last. And then, just as the room seemed to tilt completely out of focus, a voice pierced through the fog. "The ambulance is here," one of the staff members called out, rushing toward the entrance where the paramedics were now filing in. They moved quickly, wheeling a stretcher to the table where Evelyn sat slumped, barely conscious. Their voices were calm but authoritative, snapping into action as they assessed the situation. "What did she eat?" one of them asked, glancing at the plate of shrimp in front of her. Richard explained the evening's events in clipped, precise sentences, detailing what she had eaten and when the symptoms had started. But his voice, cool and collected, seemed to be at odds with the severity of the situation. The paramedics lifted Evelyn onto the stretcher, their hands moving quickly to secure her for transport. One of them pressed an oxygen mask over her face, instructing her to breathe slowly, but Evelyn could barely register the command. Her body felt like it was sinking into a deep, dark pit, and she wasn't sure she could claw her way back. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Richard walked beside her, still maintaining that eerie calm. He held her hand, but the gesture felt hollow, as if it were done out of obligation rather than love or concern. The last thing Evelyn saw before the doors of the ambulance closed was Richard's face, impassive and unreadable. She wanted to ask him why he seemed so calm, why he wasn't more terrified. But the words never came. As the ambulance sped through the streets, the paramedics worked tirelessly to stabilize Evelyn's condition. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind clouded with fear and confusion. The oxygen mask pressed firmly over her face provided some relief, but her body still felt weak, her senses dull. In the back of her mind, Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that what had happened wasn't just a random illness or food poisoning. Something felt off, though she was too weak to fully comprehend it. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Ashley Thompson, a quiet but observant cleaning staff member, watched the commotion unfold. She had been clearing tables nearby when Evelyn had started showing signs of distress. Ashley had seen people get sick before, but there was something different about this. The way Evelyn collapsed, the speed at which her condition had deteriorated, it reminded her of something. A memory flickered in the back of her mind, something from her childhood. Herbal remedies, antidotes, knowledge passed down through generations in her family. If you find it interesting, please like it. If not, please comment number 1. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. Ashley's instincts told her that this wasn't just an ordinary illness. She had a gut feeling that whatever had happened to Evelyn had been deliberate, and she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The paramedics were doing their job, but Ashley knew of a remedy that might help. She wasn't sure if it would work, but with Evelyn's life hanging in the balance, she decided to take a chance. Ignoring the curious stares from the restaurant staff and diners, Ashley quietly slipped out the back entrance and hurried to her small apartment just a few blocks away. In her kitchen, she kept a stash of herbs and natural remedies that her grandmother had taught her to use. It had been years since she had needed them, but she knew exactly what to look for. After a few minutes of frantic searching, Ashley found the vial she was looking for, a liquid extract derived from rare herbs known to counteract certain toxins. With the vial in hand, she rushed back to the restaurant, praying that she wasn't too late. When she arrived, she learned that Evelyn had already been taken to the hospital, but the paramedics were still at the scene, packing up their equipment. Without hesitation, Ashley approached them, her heart pounding in her chest. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice shaky but determined. "I think I can help. I know this might sound strange, but I have something that could work. Please, just give me a chance." The paramedics exchanged skeptical glances. It wasn't the first time someone had approached them with unconventional remedies, but the seriousness in Ashley's voice caught their attention. One of them, a young man named Dave, stepped forward. "What is it?" he asked, clearly curious but cautious. "We've done everything we can, but if you've got something that might help, we're willing to listen." Ashley explained the herbal remedy, her words tumbling out quickly. She told them about her family's knowledge of natural antidotes, about how she had seen something similar when she was younger. Dave nodded slowly, his brow furrowed. "I don't know if this will work," Ashley admitted. "But I can't just stand by and do nothing." Dave glanced at his colleagues, weighing the risks. They were trained professionals, and this kind of unorthodox solution wasn't something they normally entertained. But it was clear that Evelyn's condition was dire, and they had little time to waste. "All right," Dave said finally. "We'll give it a shot. But if anything goes wrong, it's on you." Ashley nodded, her heart racing. She handed the vial over, watching anxiously as the paramedics administered the herbal extract. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity, but slowly, a change began to take place. Evelyn's breathing steadied, the color began to return to her face, and the tension in her body seemed to ease. The paramedics, still cautious but clearly surprised, exchanged relieved glances. Whatever Ashley had done seemed to have worked, at least for now. They rushed Evelyn to the hospital, but the situation was far from over. Ashley stood outside the restaurant, her mind racing. She had done what she could to help, but something still didn't sit right with her. The memory of Richard Monroe's calm, almost detached demeanor replayed in her head. His lack of urgency, the way he had watched his wife suffering with an eerie composure, it didn't add up. As Evelyn's condition stabilized at the hospital, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She knew she needed to find out more, to dig deeper into what had really happened that night. There was a darkness surrounding Richard Monroe, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The next day, Ashley received a call from the hospital. Evelyn had survived the night, but she was still in critical condition. The doctors had stabilized her, but they couldn't explain what had caused her sudden collapse. They were baffled by the symptoms and even more so by her unexpected recovery after the herbal remedy had been administered. Ashley felt a wave of relief wash over her. At least Evelyn was alive. But as the initial relief faded, her thoughts turned back to Richard. Why hadn't he shown more emotion? Why had he seemed almost relieved when Evelyn collapsed? The more Ashley thought about it, the more convinced she became that this wasn't a simple case of food poisoning or a freak allergic reaction. Determined to find answers, Ashley began to quietly investigate. She didn't have much to go on, but she started by doing some research on Richard Monroe. What she found was disturbing. There were whispers of his ruthless business dealings, stories of how he had destroyed competitors and former partners without a second thought. But nothing concrete connected him to anything criminal. Then, one evening while cleaning the restaurant, Ashley overheard a conversation between two of the waitstaff. They were talking about how Richard had been acting strangely that night, how he had seemed so calm, almost too calm, considering his wife's condition. One of them mentioned seeing Richard with a prescription bottle earlier in the evening, though they hadn't thought much of it at the time. That was the final piece of the puzzle Ashley needed. She knew she had to confront Richard Monroe and find out the truth behind what had happened to Evelyn. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. Gathering what little evidence she had, Ashley contacted the police, hoping they would take her seriously. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she was determined to see it through. Ashley Thompson's determination had paid off. After gathering the evidence she had uncovered, Richard's strange behavior, the whispers of his ruthless dealings, and the mention of the prescription bottle, the police had taken her suspicions seriously. They launched a quiet investigation, focusing on Richard Monroe's activities in the days leading up to Evelyn's sudden illness. What they discovered was chilling. Richard had been visiting a physician known for discreetly prescribing powerful, untraceable toxins. The prescription bottle that Ashley had overheard the waitstaff mention wasn't for any ordinary medication. It contained a rare, undetectable poison that, when administered in small doses, would cause symptoms nearly identical to food poisoning or a severe allergic reaction. It was the perfect weapon for someone like Richard, a man who thrived on control, willing to eliminate any obstacle that stood in the way of his ambitions. With this new information, the police confronted Richard at his office, catching him off guard. His initial response was one of calculated calm, as though he had expected this moment but was confident in his ability to navigate it. However, as the officers presented their evidence, statements from the waitstaff, the suspicious prescription, and Evelyn's miraculous recovery thanks to Ashley's intervention, his composure began to crack. Richard was brought in for questioning, where he maintained his innocence at first. He denied any involvement in his wife's illness, claiming that Evelyn had simply eaten something that disagreed with her. But the detectives weren't swayed. They continued to press him, revealing that they had tracked down the physician who had prescribed the poison. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the once unflappable Richard began to unravel. In a sterile, cold interrogation room, Richard sat across from two detectives, his eyes betraying the fear he was trying to hide. The room felt smaller with each passing minute, the walls closing in on him. His carefully constructed life was crumbling, and for the first time in years, Richard was no longer in control. "You planned this, didn't you?" one of the detectives asked, his voice sharp but steady. "You wanted Evelyn out of the way. You wanted her wealth, her fortune, and you knew the only way to get it was to make it look like an accident. But you didn't count on someone like Ashley Thompson stepping in, did you?" Richard's jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to salvage the situation. But the truth was staring him in the face, undeniable and damning. "I didn't," Richard began, but the words faltered on his tongue. The detective leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You didn't what? Poison your wife? We know about the prescription, Richard. We know what you've been up to. It's over." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. His eyes shifted from the detective to the folder on the table, inside, the evidence that would seal his fate. He could feel his carefully maintained mask slipping away, and with it, the realization that his plan had failed. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I did it for the money. She was holding me back. I couldn't grow the business the way I wanted with her constantly giving it away to charities, to people who didn't deserve it. I deserve that money, not them." The confession hung in the air, cold and devoid of remorse. The detective leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Richard had finally admitted what they had suspected all along, that his greed and ambition had driven him to commit an unforgivable act. But the story wasn't over yet. The police still needed more details, more proof to ensure that Richard would face justice. As they continued to question him, Richard revealed the full extent of his plan. He had begun plotting Evelyn's death months earlier, researching poisons that would leave no trace, making sure everything appeared as natural as possible. He had chosen the restaurant specifically because he knew it would be easy to blame the shrimp, to make it look like a tragic accident. What Richard hadn't counted on was Ashley. Her quick thinking had saved Evelyn's life, disrupting his carefully laid plans. In the interrogation room, he spoke of Ashley with a mixture of contempt and disbelief, as though he still couldn't understand how a lowly cleaning staff member had managed to derail everything. With Richard's confession recorded, the police wasted no time. He was formally charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and within hours, news of his arrest spread like wildfire. The once respected businessman, known for his success and charm, had been revealed for what he truly was, a cold, calculating man willing to sacrifice everything, including his wife, for his own gain. Evelyn, still recovering in the hospital, was informed of Richard's arrest. The news hit her like a tidal wave, a mixture of relief and devastation washing over her. She had always known there was something off about her husband, but to hear the truth laid bare, to know that he had been willing to kill her for money, was a blow she wasn't sure she could fully recover from. A few days later, Evelyn found herself at the police station, face to face with Richard for the first time since his arrest. He sat on the other side of the glass, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. His usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn stared at the man she had spent 15 years of her life with, the man she had trusted, loved, and built a life with. And now, that man was a stranger, a monster who had tried to take her life for the sake of his greed. Richard broke the silence first. "I didn't want it to end this way, Evelyn." She shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't want it to end this way? You tried to kill me, Richard. For what? For money?" He looked down at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. I thought it would be easier this way. You were always giving it away, always more concerned with helping others than with us." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of anger, of betrayal. She stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You've lost everything, Richard. I hope it was worth it." Richard's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community. The man once celebrated for his business acumen and charm was now exposed as a criminal who had attempted to murder his own wife. The story dominated the headlines for weeks, and people who had once admired Richard were now left to grapple with the ugly truth. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, and Richard Monroe, once untouchable in his high society circles, found himself facing the consequences of his actions in the stark, unforgiving halls of justice. Evelyn Monroe, though physically recovering, was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life. Her husband's betrayal had cut deeper than she could have imagined, and the emotional scars would take far longer to heal than the physical ones. She had always known that Richard could be cold, even ruthless when it came to his business dealings, but never in her worst nightmares had she believed he would go so far as to attempt to kill her for money. In the weeks following his arrest, Evelyn had to confront the reality of her marriage. The man she had built her life with, the man she had shared her dreams and successes with, had viewed her as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Evelyn knew she had to move forward. She could not allow Richard's treachery to define the rest of her life. One bright spot in the aftermath of the ordeal was Ashley Thompson. The cleaning staff member who had saved Evelyn's life quickly became much more than just the woman who had administered the antidote. Ashley's courage and quick thinking had not only thwarted Richard's plan but had also inspired Evelyn in a profound way. In Ashley, Evelyn saw resilience, strength, and the power of compassion. The bond they had formed during those harrowing moments became the foundation for a new chapter in both of their lives. After Richard's arrest, Ashley had faced backlash for stepping out of her role as a staff member and intervening in Evelyn's medical crisis. The restaurant management, concerned about potential legal ramifications, had initially suspended her. But the public support for Ashley had been overwhelming. Once Evelyn's story became known, people rallied behind Ashley, recognizing her as the true hero of the night. Under pressure from public opinion and Evelyn's influence, the restaurant not only reinstated Ashley but also offered her a promotion. However, Ashley had no interest in returning to her old life. One afternoon, as Evelyn rested at home, still recovering from the emotional toll of everything that had transpired, she invited Ashley over. They sat together in Evelyn's sunlit living room, sipping tea and talking about the future. It was during this conversation that Evelyn proposed the idea that would change both of their lives forever. "I've been thinking," Evelyn began, her voice thoughtful yet steady. "I want to do something more. I can't let Richard's actions be the end of my story. I want to turn this pain into something that can help others." Ashley listened intently, nodding as Evelyn continued. "There are so many women out there, women like me, like you, who face dangers they can't always see coming. Domestic violence, manipulation, abuse, it comes in so many forms, and too often, it's hidden behind closed doors. I've been given a second chance, thanks to you. And I want to use that chance to make a difference." Ashley's eyes lit up with understanding. "What are you thinking?" she asked, leaning forward. "I want to start a nonprofit," Evelyn said, the idea taking shape as she spoke. "A place where women can go for help, a sanctuary where they can rebuild their lives away from abusive situations. We'll offer them legal assistance, counseling, financial support, everything they need to start over." Ashley's heart raced with excitement. She had always dreamed of doing something meaningful, of using her experiences to help others, but she had never had the means to make it happen. Now, with Evelyn's resources and her own determination, they could make a real difference. Evelyn smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose for the first time since the ordeal with Richard had begun. "We'll call it Haven House," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "A safe haven for women who need a way out." And so, the seeds of Haven House were planted. Over the following months, Evelyn and Ashley worked tirelessly to bring the organization to life. They gathered a team of dedicated professionals, lawyers, counselors, social workers, who shared their vision of creating a refuge for women in need. Haven House quickly grew from an idea into a thriving movement, supported by the community and funded by the wealth that Richard had once sought to steal from Evelyn. Richard Monroe, meanwhile, faced the full weight of the law. His trial was swift, and the evidence against him was irrefutable. His confession, along with the corroborating testimony of the restaurant staff and the physician who had provided the poison, ensured that there was no escape from justice. Richard was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his once glittering life reduced to a series of cold, gray days behind bars. In the years that followed, Evelyn found a sense of peace that she hadn't thought possible in the immediate aftermath of Richard's betrayal. She focused her energy on Haven House, helping countless women find safety and a new start. She also found love again, this time with a man named Daniel Clark, a fellow philanthropist who had been inspired by her resilience and dedication to helping others. Daniel's kindness and honesty were a stark contrast to the cold, calculated nature of Richard, and with him, Evelyn was able to heal. As for Ashley, her role in Haven House grew as well. She became the public face of the organization, using her story to inspire others and advocate for women's rights. She had gone from a cleaning staff member to a leader in a cause that was changing lives. The bond between Evelyn and Ashley remained strong, a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of women who refused to be defined by the traumas they had endured. Together, Evelyn and Ashley had turned a tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. Haven House became a symbol of resilience, of how even the darkest moments could lead to a future filled with light. Years had passed since the dramatic events that had upended Evelyn Monroe's life, and much had changed. The painful memories of betrayal and near-death no longer haunted her as they once had. Instead, they had transformed into a source of strength, driving her forward. Evelyn had chosen to reclaim her life, and in doing so, she had helped countless others do the same. Haven House, the nonprofit organization Evelyn and Ashley Thompson had built from the ground up, had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. What started as a small refuge for women in need had evolved into a nationwide network of safe houses, legal services, and counseling centers dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence and abuse. The organization had become a beacon of hope for women across the country, offering them not just a way out of dangerous situations, but a path to rebuild their lives with dignity and support. Evelyn had poured her heart and soul into the cause. She had learned to use her wealth and influence not for personal gain, but to make a tangible difference in the lives of others. Her work at Haven House had given her a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to move beyond the pain that Richard had caused her. It was ironic in a way, what he had tried to destroy had only made her stronger. Through the years, Evelyn had become a public figure, known for her advocacy work and her tireless efforts to support women's rights. She traveled the country, speaking at events, meeting with lawmakers, and raising awareness about the issues facing women in abusive relationships. Her story, of betrayal, survival, and resilience, had resonated with many, and she used her platform to amplify the voices of those who couldn't speak for themselves. But even as Haven House thrived and her public life blossomed, Evelyn found solace in her personal life as well. After Richard's trial and imprisonment, she had slowly opened her heart again, this time to Daniel Clark. Daniel, a philanthropist with a deep commitment to social justice, had been a pillar of support for Evelyn during her darkest days. His kindness and unwavering loyalty had helped her heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. Daniel and Evelyn's relationship blossomed into something beautiful and grounded in trust, the very thing that had been missing in her marriage to Richard. With Daniel, Evelyn found the love she had always deserved, free from the shadows of manipulation and betrayal. They had married quietly in a small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, with Ashley standing by Evelyn's side as her maid of honor. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of love that felt like a new beginning. Ashley, too, had found her own path of success and fulfillment. She had become a prominent figure in the world of women's advocacy, using her experience with Evelyn to inspire others. Her role at Haven House had expanded, and she had become a vital leader within the organization, guiding its growth and ensuring that its mission remained true to its roots. Ashley's story, of stepping out of the shadows to save a life and, in turn, finding her own calling, was one that resonated deeply with the women Haven House served. The bond between Evelyn and Ashley had only deepened over the years. They were more than just colleagues, they were friends, bound by a shared experience that had forever changed the course of their lives. Together, they had taken the darkness of Richard's betrayal and turned it into something powerful, something that brought light to others. Richard Monroe, meanwhile, had all but disappeared from public consciousness. After his conviction, he had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and the world had quickly moved on without him. The man who had once commanded respect and admiration was now just a footnote, forgotten by the business world and shunned by society. In the cold confines of his cell, Richard had plenty of time to reflect on the choices that had led him there. But for Evelyn, he was no longer a presence in her life, he was a chapter she had closed long ago. In the quiet moments of reflection, Evelyn often thought about how far she had come. There were still scars, both visible and invisible, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were reminders of her resilience, of her ability to survive and thrive in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The life she had now, filled with love, purpose, and hope, was one she had built with her own hands, with the help of people who truly cared about her. One day, as Evelyn walked through the halls of Haven House, she paused in front of a wall covered with photos. These were the faces of the women who had come through the doors of Haven House, women who had found safety, support, and a new beginning because of the work she and Ashley had done. Each face told a story of struggle, but also of triumph. Evelyn smiled, knowing that their success was her success, their victories her own. She stepped into her office, where Daniel was waiting for her. He smiled warmly as she entered, handing her a cup of coffee. They had just returned from a trip to Washington, where Evelyn had testified before Congress on the importance of funding for domestic violence shelters. It was a major step forward for Haven House, and for Evelyn personally, as she continued to push for change on a national level. "Thinking about all we've done?" Daniel asked, his eyes full of pride. Evelyn nodded, taking a seat beside him. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "It's hard to believe how far we've come. And yet, there's still so much more to do." Daniel placed his hand over hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. You've already changed so many lives, Evelyn. And together, we'll keep fighting." Evelyn smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Her journey had been long, filled with pain and struggle, but also with love and triumph. She had found her way through the darkness, and now, standing in the light, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the sun set outside the windows of Haven House, casting a warm glow over the city, Evelyn looked toward the future with hope. The work was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next, because she had learned that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way forward. And with the support of those she loved, she knew she would continue to make a difference, one life at a time. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.